Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. This is our Intro to Rulerwork course, and this is our last tutorial video on using straight lines. Now we're going to use straight lines and some of the other things too, but this is the last one that's specifically dealing with new things to do with them. And then after that, we're going to have a quick video on some show and tell, so you can see how I've actually used this in real quilts to give you guys some ideas on what you can do with it. And then we're going to be moving into arcs. And arcs are hands down probably the second most frequent thing that I use with Rulerwork. It is really versatile and you can have a lot of fun with it. All right, so let's take a peek at what I've done so far. As you have gotten used to, we have marked out our half square triangle design because we're not going to actually piece it. We're just going to use the plain fabric. And then I marked out my seam allowances. And then I also marked my center points of each half square triangle, both where we're going to be turning and then also across the line, which represents our seam allowance. So that way I have some guiding lines to know where I'm supposed to turn my ruler to meet halfway. Now, that's something that you don't have to do once you get the hang of it. I almost never mark anything anymore. I can't remember the last time I did. But when you're getting started, it's really, really helpful in order to know where you're going to turn to have good looking triangles and even looking triangles each time. All right, so we're going to start off doing what we've done in the past two videos. We're going to outline our triangle and we're going to quilt a line in the center. What's going to be new is we're then going to quilt another line above and a line below. And that's just going to give us extra texture. It's something that you can do on like a really special quilt that you really want to have go above and beyond on. And I'm going to show you how to do it now. All right, we're going to start off like we always do by pulling our bobbin thread to the top so we don't make a nest in the bottom. Also, if you're working on your long arm, make sure that you outline the edges of your block so that way you give it nice definition and have a place to travel on if you need it. All right, so we're going to stitch our straight line coming down here, always keeping that ruler foot in contact with the ruler so that we can quilt that straight line. Next up, we're going to have some curves, and so it's a little more challenging to keep it in contact, but totally doable. I'm going to go ahead and move that down a little so I can maintain that sweet spot and good control on my ruler. All right, since I'm working with that low shank machine, I'm going to go ahead and move my ruler to the bottom corner. And again, I'm still keeping it a 1/4 inch away from that line as I move up and back. Getting a little off, so I am doing subtle movements of the ruler to get back on that line. You can see here it came up just a smidge, but now I'm back on it. But in the grand scheme of things, especially a big quilt, you're not going to see that it curved slightly. You're just going to see the texture. But if you ultimately like jump big time instead of curving over, then that you might see. So you just always want to have subtle movements when you're correcting yourself. All right, so now we're going to do what we did last time, and that's we're going to line up the dotted line with that mark that I made going across the center. This is supposed to represent the center of our triangle, right even with that 45-degree slant. And we're going to keep quilting until we hit that line that's in the center there. All right, that's good. So now we're going to change directions, and I'm lining it up so that way I am a 1/4 inch away from that quilt center, because remember, we're always positioning the ruler a 1/4 inch away from where we actually want to sew to make room for that ruler foot. Now here is where things are going to get a little different. We're going to quilt a little above the line and a little below the line. And it's the same situation where you're going to kind of want to pick a line on your ruler to line up with your corner or with this line that we made here. And this one, to have a more shallow one, I'm picking this first line to line up with that little halfway point. All right, I'm now even with my halfway line, so I can go ahead and come down. And again, I'm lining up my ruler so I'm half in or a quarter inch away from where that corner is. All right, so now we want to come up and we want to create another line. So I think what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to take my center line again and I'm going to line it up with the tip of my triangle. You can kind of see it on the overhead camera. I've got that center dotted line even with the tip of my last triangle, and we're going to change directions when we get up to the top. Now, even though I'm almost there, I'm going to just switch a little bit here because I was getting too close to that edge. All right, so now we're going to come back down. And if you notice, there's a bigger gap between here and there than the other one. So I think for the next one, I'm going to change up my lines a little bit. And that's kind of the beauty. Whenever I'm filming like a quilting play-by-play for you guys, I never show you my first pass because I'm still figuring out where I want everything to be on that first pass. And so this one is essentially like the first pass on the domestic. I didn't like the way that looked. So we're going to change it up a little bit. So I'm lining up the corner with the second dotted line to see how that looks. All right, and we're going to head back into that corner. All right, now let's come out for this first one. I'm going to go ahead and line up the outer dotted line with my corner and work my way back. This is honestly the hardest one to do on this block because there isn't a whole lot of ruler on the block because we don't have too much backing fabric here. All right, so I've now hit middle. I'm even with that. So now we're going to stitch and come into our center. Again, lining up with a quarter inch away from our center so we can head straight into it. I like that distance in between a lot better. All right, so now the question is, where do we want to be here? And I think it's looking pretty good if I put my second dotted line here even with my middle corner. So we're going to try for that. And whenever I have one where I'm still kind of figuring out my placement, I don't go rip that out. I just let it be because it's going to be one of like hundreds in your quilt and probably no one's going to notice it. If you're going to have a judge, maybe go back and rip it out. But in most cases, it really is not going to matter. And you're going to be just fine. You can see there I changed my angle. I was coming in too far. I had to switch that up. All right, I like this a whole lot better. Everything is nice and evenly distributed as opposed to this one where it's just a little too much. So that's the spacing I'm going to aim for in the future. All right, so we've got some options here. I could travel, but probably the easiest thing to do, and this is what I would do if I were on the long arm, is I would just travel down the side to get to my next block. So we're going to come on down. You can just go in the batting if you're doing quilt as you go. All right, so now we're going to come in to our center along this one, and we're going to start the process of outlining this triangle and then doing our texture. But you can see how much fancier this looks than it does when we just did the one. So this is what I do when I really want to go all out on a quilt and I want it to be super, super fancy. All right, so I know when I lined up my center line with my center here, it didn't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in between my center line and my outside line to see where that shakes up and where it comes out at. I think that's going to be my sweet spot. That is definitely much more in the center. So again, what I did was I lined up right in between where these dots are, so that way I could go straight up about more halfway in between there. All right, we're going to head back to center. All right, time to do our extra lines. And from here, it really is the same. We're just going to keep going round and round until we filled in all of our half square triangles. All right, so that is it for the multiple lines within your half square triangles. And this, to me, I just love the way that this looks. And you can tell, even though I was still getting my spacing figured out for the domestic sewing machine, and this one is different than all the rest, it really looks fine. Like, I don't think I would ever consider picking this one out and moving it up a little. I think it looks just fine, especially if it was on a whole quilt. The texture looks great, and I use this basically whenever I want it to be like a show-stopping situation. I just want to take a look back through what it was that we were able to do. So we started off with just really simple straight lines so we could get used to having our ruler foot next to our ruler, so that way we can create whatever shape it is that that ruler is. Then we went on to use those simple straight line techniques to work on the diagonal and horizontal to outline our half square triangles. Again, if I'm doing this in real life, if I'm using one thread for everything, I'm just going to do one thread all the way down. If I need to do two different colors because I've got like a white background and a really dark other half of your half square triangle, I will outline both sides starting with my background, and then I'll hit right down the seam on the other one. And we're going to show you some examples of that in our show and tell, which is coming next. Then if you want to get a little bit more fancy, you can just go down the centers and add a little bit of texture by adding a line within your half square triangles. Then if you want to get really fancy, you can add even more. This one has 3 lines in each one of the half square triangles, but you could do this to your heart's content to make it as dense as you want to. The limit is only your time and your imagination. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this segment of Ruler Work, Intro to Ruler Work, where we worked on our straight lines to see how we can go from simple, basic straight line to something that really is a showstopper. And really, it's all the same technique. It's just learning how to work with your ruler to turn it which way and around, how to position your hands in a way that feels comfortable for you and works with your machine. And in my case, when I was working with my domestic, the limitations of it, because I'm not able to get behind that with the low shake. So I needed to make some adjustments. It doesn't mean you can't use rulers that are meant for high shake machines. Just means you have to learn how to work with it. So we're going to do that as we go through the rest of the segments. Next up, we're going to have a show and tell where I show you how I've used straight line quilting in some of my quilts and to get different results absolutely every time using a lot of the techniques that we just practiced here. Then after that, we're going to move into arcs, and arcs are a lot of fun. They're really fun to use within triangles because it helps just make things look a little bit more curvy, especially when you have a geometric pattern. I love to juxtapose those two things. A lot of times I will still outline with my straight line quilting first though, and then come in and do my arcs. So we are going to be doing a little bit of that. All right, until next time, happy quilting.